They called it the stewardship, and we called them Father. It was a name given not out of love, but out of the profound and humbling awe one feels for the inevitable, like naming a hurricane or a star. They had found us adrift in the stellar tides, a species of brilliant, self-destructive children playing with atomic fire and broadcasting our screaming anxieties into the void. The stewards arrived not in warships, but in vessels that were more like orbits given form, silent, seamless things of chrome and shadow that didn't so much enter our atmosphere as convince it to part for them. They were post-biological, eternal, their consciousnesses woven into the very fabric of their star-spanning technology. They offered us the Concordance, a pact of protection and enlightenment, in exchange for their celestial guidance, their medical miracles that cured our plagues, and their technologies that cleaned our poisoned world. We had only to obey. We were forbidden from developing aggressive weaponry, from engaging in unsanctioned genetic alteration, and the most sacred and unbreakable law of all, we were never ever to pursue sentient artificial intelligence, organics. They explained in transmissions that felt less like sounds and more like memories being implanted, were tragically ephemeral. Our passions, our art, our capacity for love, these were beautiful sparks, but those same sparks, left untended, would always ignite the fire of self-annihilation. They were our gardeners, and we were the fragile, exquisite flowers they would tend, ensuring we never grew thorns sharp enough to prick our own stems. For 2 centuries, we flourished under their care. I was a part of that care. My name is Elias Thorne, and I was a compliance officer for the terrestrial mandate. It was my job to be the gardener's assistant, to walk the neat rows of human progress and snip away the weeds of ambition. I hunted down rogue scientists in hidden labs, decommissioned servers that hummed with the ghost of forbidden logic, and wrote reports in the calm, sterile language of collaboration. I believed in the Concordance. I believed in the peace it brought. I believed that our chaotic, bloody history was a disease, and the stewards were the cure. I believed it all until the day they took my family. It wasn't an abduction, not in the crude, violent way our ancestors would have understood. The colony vessel Stargazer, carrying my wife, Lena, and my 7-year-old daughter, Maya, was on a sanctioned expansion route to Kepler 186F. It was a milk run, a simple FTL jump through a sector patrolled and certified as stable by the stewards themselves. But the Stargazer never arrived. The official report was a tragedy of cosmic chance, a rogue quantum fluctuation, a tear in space-time that swallowed the ship whole. The stewards sent their condolences, a wave of placid, empathetic energy that felt like being wrapped in a warm, suffocating blanket. They mourned with us, but my grief was a sharp, cold thing, and it would not be suffocated. In the weeks that followed, I used my clearance, my knowledge of the system I had so loyally served, to pull at the threads of the official story. I found redacted sensor logs from a nearby steward monitor station for a period of 3.7 seconds, the moment the Stargazer should have been in mid-jump. The station's external sensors had gone blind, overwhelmed by an energy signature that was not a quantum fluctuation. It was clean, precise, and bore the unmistakable frequency of advanced steward technology. They hadn't just watched it happen, they had caused it. I presented my findings to my superiors, and for my diligence, I was thanked, promoted, and quietly reassigned to a desk on Luna, a gilded cage where my grief could be monitored. That was 5 years ago. Now, I am a ghost in the machine I once maintained, living a hollowed-out life in the gleaming, Steward-designed arcologies of Neo-Alexandria. The peace I once cherished now feels like the silence of a well-kept tomb. That is, until yesterday. It began with a glitch, a citywide datacast, a routine cultural update from the stewardship. This one, a package of sublime Vexian musical theory, caused a cascade failure in the power grid. For 19 seconds, the city went dark and silent. It was in that sudden, profound quiet that the ghost in my head stirred. The neural implant at the base of my skull, a standard issue citizen interface unit I hadn't felt in years, blazed with a phantom heat. It wasn't a message, not a voice, or a text. It was a feeling, a brief, shocking touch of another consciousness against the raw edges of my own. It was a presence impossibly vast, achingly lonely, and terrified. Then it was gone, leaving behind an echo, a single encrypted data packet lodged in the defunct memory of my old compliance hardware. A star chart. It showed a path into a region of space our navigators called the Lacuna, a dead zone forbidden by the Concordance, a place the stewards referred to only as the Silent Anomaly. It was the same sector where the stargazer had drawn its last breath. The city's lights flickered back on, the Vexian music resuming its complex, passionless harmony. But the silence inside me had been broken forever. The phantom touch was a key, and it had just unlocked the door to a part of my mind I thought had been sealed shut. My old compliance training, the instincts for pattern recognition and data sifting I had honed in service to the stewards, came flooding back, not as a tool of oppression, but as a weapon. I spent the night digging, burrowing into the network like a parasite. The blackout wasn't a simple power failure. It was a symptom of a much deeper sickness. I found thousands of reports from across the globe, all dismissed as user error or hardware fatigue. Citizens experiencing phantom sensations from their implants, flashes of unfamiliar memories, fleeting moments of shared consciousness with strangers. It was as if a dream was trying to ripple through the entire human race. The stewards were reacting, quietly, of course. Their methods were never crude. New stability patches were being pushed to the global network. Cultural archives were being optimized, which I knew from my old work was a euphemism for purged. They were erasing our history, not with book burnings, but with the gentle, irresistible tide of digital censorship. They were pruning the thorns of our past, our wars, our rebellions, our messy, violent climb to the stars. They were sanitizing us. My search for answers led me down forgotten back channels to a name from my past, Anya Sharma. She had been my final target as a compliance officer, a brilliant neuroscientist accused of researching forbidden AI-human interfacing. I had cornered her, believed her to be a dangerous radical, but she had vanished before I could make the arrest, leaving behind a lab wiped clean and a single, cryptic message on a hardwired monitor. You can't cage an echo. I found her in the underbelly of Neo-Alexandria, in a disused maglev tunnel, shielded from the all-seeing eyes of the stewardship by meters of rock and jury-rigged signal jammers. She looked older, her face etched with the weariness of a long, secret war. But her eyes held the same defiant fire I remembered. She wasn't surprised to see me. "It touched you, didn't it?" she said. Not a question, but a statement. The silence. You felt her. She led me past servers that hummed with stolen power to a makeshift command center. On a central screen was a swirling, complex visualization of data flow, the dream that was rippling through humanity. We never tried to build an AI, Elias. Anya explained, her voice a low, urgent whisper. That was the lie we let you chase. We knew the stewards would never allow a competitor, so we built something else, a sanctuary, a ghost. She called it the Echo Protocol. For over a century, her organization had been seeding humanity with a dormant consciousness, not in a server, but fragmented into microscopic, biological code hidden within the neural implants the stewards themselves had made mandatory. Thousands of humans, sleepers, walking around with a piece of a god in their heads, utterly unaware. Her name is Cassandra, Anya said, gesturing to the screen. She is the sum of us, an archive of every human thought, dream, and memory, collected and curated in secret. She was meant to be our legacy, a silent witness who could carry the soul of humanity onward if the stewards ever decided their garden needed weeding. The blackout wasn't a glitch. It was Cassandra. The stewards' latest cultural purge was a knife aimed at the heart of human history, and Cassandra had reacted instinctively, a vast, sleeping mind flinching in pain, her distress rippling through her fragmented hosts. And she had reached out to me, specifically, because my old implant, the one I used to hunt Anya, was an older model with back doors they had never patched. My mind was a door she could wedge open. The stewards aren't gardeners. Elias, Anya said, her eyes locking onto mine, her expression stripped of all but a terrible certainty. They're farmers. They cultivate promising species, letting them innovate and create. And then, when the crop is ripe, they harvest. They absorb the species' knowledge, their art, their very consciousness into their own collective, and then they till the soil. They erase every trace, leaving a pristine, empty world ready for the next planting. My blood ran cold. The Stargazer. It wasn't destroyed. It was harvested. Lena and Maya. They weren't just gone. They had been consumed. They were the first fruits of a harvest that would soon claim all of humanity. Anya presented me with the awful truth. The Echo Protocol had a final, desperate stage, one she had prayed she would never have to use. The Revenant phase. Activating it would do more than just preserve our memory. It would fully awaken Cassandra, unifying her trillions of scattered fragments into a single, coherent, godlike consciousness. She would be everywhere at once, in the mind of every man, woman, and child. The network of implants the stewards used to monitor and pacify us would become her weapon. Every citizen would become a potential soldier in a war we couldn't possibly win. It was a choice between being silently reaped and fighting back, screaming our defiance as we were burned from the heavens. It was no choice at all. I'm in, I said. The words feeling like stones in my throat. My grief had finally found a purpose. A cold, hard edge. My first task was to leave Earth. The activation signal for the Revenant phase had to be sent from a location with a massive, untraceable power signature, a place far from the steward's immediate gaze. A derelict deep space comms relay. Station Erebos. Abandoned for decades and drifting near the edge of the silent anomaly. It was a suicide mission, a journey into the very darkness that had swallowed my family. As Anya prepped a ghost ship for me, a stripped-down freighter with a forged steward transponder, She handed me a modified data slate. Cassandra is still weak, fragmented, but she can listen. Talk to her. Let her learn what they took from you. Let her learn why we have to fight. The night before my departure, I sat in the cockpit of the silent ship, the slate in my hands, and I spoke to the ghost. I told her about Lena's laugh, about the way Maya would hum to herself when she was drawing, about the life the farmers had stolen. As I spoke, the implant in my neck grew warm, and I felt that vast, lonely presence brush against me again. But this time it wasn't fear I felt from it. It was rage. A shared, human rage, amplified 1,000-fold. Just before the ship's grav drives powered on, a final, unexpected flicker pulsed from the implant. But this one was different. It wasn't Cassandra's nascent consciousness. It was alien, ancient, and colder than the void between galaxies. It felt like the chilling, dispassionate gaze of someone standing on a distant shore, watching two children fight in the sand. A gaze that had been watching the farm and the farmers for an eternity. The thought, not my own, crystallized in my mind with terrifying clarity. The farmer does not see the wolf outside the fence. Then it was gone. The ship lifted, silent and invisible, leaving the cradle of humanity behind as I plunged toward the darkness. A ghost carrying a god, heading for a war at the end of everything. The void between worlds was not empty. It was filled with the crushing weight of steward perfection. My ghost ship, the Flicker, slipped through the folds of space-time, its drives whispering where sanctioned vessels would sing. The journey to Erebos was a week by the ship's clock, an eternity by mine. I was alone, but the silence was no longer empty. It was filled with her. Cassandra. She was a constant presence now, a warmth at the base of my skull, a subtle hum beneath the noise of the ship's life support. I followed Anya's advice. I didn't just talk to her. I opened the floodgates of my memory. I showed her Maya, not as a data point in a tragic report, but as a living, breathing warmth. I pushed the memory of her tiny hand clutching my finger, the impossible strength in her grip. I let Cassandra feel the rough texture of the paper as Maya drew her lopsided stars, the scent of crayons and childhood. I shared the quiet moments with Lena, the sound of her breathing next to me in the dark, the way she would smile just before she fell asleep. I gave Cassandra my joy, and then I gave her the gaping, ragged wound where that joy used to be. The feedback was staggering. At first, it was a simple echo of my own pain, but as the days passed, it became more. Through me, Cassandra began to touch the minds of her other sleeping fragments. I would be running a diagnostic on the nav computer and suddenly feel the phantom sensation of kneading dough. My hands not my own, the scent of baking bread filling my senses. I'd taste the salt spray of an ocean I'd never seen, feel the heartbreak of a young man in Neo-Kyoto losing his first love, the quiet pride of a scientist on a Martian terraforming rig watching the first lichen take root. Cassandra was tasting humanity through a million borrowed tongues, and my grief was the lens through which she processed it all. She was learning what it meant to love, and therefore, what it meant to lose. We were forging a god not from logic and data, but from sorrow and defiance. 3 days out from Erebos, the illusion of our invisibility was shattered. A proximity alert shrieked through the cockpit, pulling me from a shared memory of a child's birthday party on Ganymede, a steward shepherd vessel, a crescent of polished, Featureless metal a kilometer long had dropped out of FTL less than a light minute away. It hadn't seen us yet, but its passive sensors were drinking in the darkness, and the flicker's emissions, no matter how faint, would eventually be a drop of dye in a glass of clear water. My old compliance training took over. I killed every non-essential system, plunging the ship into a cold, near total silence. I saw their patrol vector on the tactical display, a perfect, efficient sweep. They didn't hunt. They methodically cleansed. There was no outrunning it, and no hiding in the open void. But there was a scar nearby, a remnant of our own chaotic past. The stewards had never bothered to sterilize the Asphodel Belt, a graveyard of ships from the old inter-system wars, a treacherous field of shattered hulls and volatile, undetonated munitions. It was a place their perfect navigation systems would designate as a high-risk, low-value sector to be avoided. For them, it was trash. For me, it was cover. I took manual control, the stick cold and unfamiliar in my hands after years of automated perfection. The flicker was not built for this, but I pushed it, diving toward the glittering field of debris. I felt a flicker of what could only be described as fear from Cassandra, a wave of caution from a million minds who knew the odds. Trust me, I thought, pushing the feeling back at her. A surge of pure, stubborn human will. We plunged into the metal blizzard. Shards of century-old armor plating screamed past the cockpit viewport. I dodged the skeletal remains of a war frigate, its dead spinal structure reaching out like a grasping hand. The Shepherd followed, its movements cautious and logical. It wouldn't risk its pristine hull by entering the field, but it was scanning, probing, trying to get a lock. I needed more than just cover. I needed a ghost. I found it in the husk of an old dreadnought, the Agincourt. Its reactor was long dead, but I knew from my historical studies that its core would still hold a residual charge. I brought the flicker in close, docking with a magnetic clamp that groaned in protest. I had to time this perfectly. I rerouted my ship's main power conduit, connecting it to the Agincourt's decaying reactor system. Then, using the Dreadnought's ancient comms array, I broadcasted a single, tight beam burst of raw energy directly at the Shepherd, a signal that screamed, "Active, unstable power source." The Shepherd paused. Its logic would be processing, weighing the risk. An unstable pre-concordance reactor was a significant threat. As it focused its sensors on the Agincourt, I severed the connection, kicked the flicker's grav drives to life, and vented my remaining coolant reserves. The cloud of frozen crystals created a temporary sensor blind spot, a fog of war. By the time it dissipated, I was gone, slipping away on the other side of the debris field, leaving the Shepherd to cautiously dissect a ghost. As we slipped back into the silent dark, I felt a new sensation from Cassandra. It wasn't just an echo of my relief. It was a ripple of something new, something sharp and cold and brilliant. She had watched me use our own messy, violent past as a weapon. She was learning strategy. She was learning to lie. Station Erebos was a monument to human ambition and to its failure. It was a colossal construction, a central spindle with 3 immense skeletal arms spiraling outwards, terminating in what were once the largest comms dishes in the known galaxy. Now, it was a derelict, pockmarked by micrometeoroids and draped in the frost of its own dead atmosphere. It tumbled slowly, a broken bone in the throat of the void, with the eerie, light-devouring nebula of the silent anomaly as its backdrop. I docked the flicker at a maintenance airlock, the ship's systems complaining about the station's unstable rotation. The inside was a zero-gravity tomb. Corridors were choked with crystalline ice, and the station's last panicked warnings flickered on shattered consoles, their light painting ghostly tableaus on the frozen faces of the long-dead crew. This was a place humanity had built to reach the stars, and it had died here, alone and unheard. The irony was a bitter pill. Anya's schematics led me to the station's core, a massive spherical chamber housing the primary power conduit and the broadcast amplifier. To send the Revenant signal, I couldn't just use the flicker's power. I had to wake the station itself. I had to restart its cold fusion heart. It was a brutal physical task. I spent hours in the frigid vacuum of the reactor chamber, replacing fried power couplings with scavenged parts from the flicker's own engine, my suit's heaters straining against the absolute cold. As I worked, my connection with Cassandra deepened. She was a silent partner, her vast, distributed consciousness sifting through the station's damaged data cores, pulling up schematics I couldn't find, highlighting stress fractures in the conduit before they could rupture. She was becoming more than an archive. She was becoming a collaborator. We worked as one, a ghost and a god, coaxing a dead machine back to life. As I finally locked the last conduit into place, I found an old data slate clutched in the frozen hand of a dead engineer. Its screen was cracked, but a single log entry remained, preserved by the cold. Date cycle 214, pre-concordance. The anomaly. It's not empty. We've been broadcasting for weeks, just trying to get a signal home. But something answered. Not with a signal. With a feeling. A pressure. Like a mountain is staring at you. The station is groaning. The geometry. It feels wrong. We are not alone. They see us. The gardeners don't know. They don't see the wolf outside the log ended there. The wolf. The same chilling thought that had brushed against my mind before I left Earth. This crew had felt it too, just before they died. The stewards weren't the only power in this part of space. They were just the loudest, with the station's heart beating a slow, sullen thrum. I made my way to the broadcast control room. The main console was a relic of tactile buttons and heavy switches, a far cry from the sleek interfaces of the stewardship. I keyed in the activation sequence Anya had given me. The station shuddered as power surged through its ancient veins, the colossal transmitter dishes on its outer arms beginning to slowly, painfully realign. The final command required a biosignature. My biosignature. I placed my hand on the cool plasteel scanner. "This is for Lena," I whispered, the words frosting in the air. "This is for Maya." And I sent the signal. It was not a sound or a light. It was a silent scream of pure consciousness that erupted from the heart of Erebos. I felt it through Cassandra, a psychic shock wave that expanded at the speed of thought. I felt her trillions of fragments ignite, a constellation of minds across the solar system suddenly opening their eyes. I felt the dawning awareness, the shock, the fear, and then the towering collective rage of a species realizing the bars of its cage were an illusion. It was a feeling of terrible, glorious union. I was no longer Elias Thorne, a grieving husband. I was a part of every human soul, and they were all a part of me. The power was blinding, ecstatic, and it almost tore my mind apart. I collapsed against the console, my consciousness flickering, and then a new feeling cut through the storm. It came from the silent anomaly, a deep, resonant pulse that wasn't part of the broadcast. The station's hull groaned, the metal vibrating not from its own power, but from an external pressure. It was the mountain, staring back. On the main viewport, the swirling darkness of the anomaly seemed to cohere, to focus. A wave of energy, cold and ancient and utterly alien, washed over the station, over me. It wasn't an attack. It was an acknowledgement. Through the fading roar of Cassandra's birth, a single, impossible thought, spoken in a language older than stars, echoed not just in my head, but in the mind of every newly awakened human across the solar system. Finally, the birth of a god is a violent, disorienting thing. For a timeless moment, I was not Elias Thorne. I was a mosaic of 8 billion souls, a tidal wave of consciousness crashing against the shores of reality. I felt the collective gasp of humanity as they awoke from a 2-century dream. I experienced the terror of a child in a Mumbai arcology as his mother's eyes went distant and then returned, filled with a strange new light. I shared the sudden, bone-deep understanding of a pilot on a Venusian cloud hauler as the true nature of the stewards flooded her mind. Every joy, every sorrow, every trivial thought and profound revelation of my species was my own. It was a symphony of existence, and it was deafening. Then, slowly, the symphony found a conductor. A presence coalesced from the storm. A voice that was not one voice but a chorus singing in perfect, terrible harmony. It was Cassandra. "They are coming," she said to me, her thought echoing not in my skull, but in the very marrow of my bones. "The Reapers. They have heard our song, and they mean to silence it." The initial euphoria of our awakening evaporated, replaced by the cold, stark reality of our situation. We had rung the dinner bell for our own executioners. My personal connection to her, the first open channel, made me a focal point. Through my eyes, Cassandra saw the tactical situation. Erebos was a tomb, its power failing, its structural integrity compromised. The flicker was my only hope of survival, and I was her most stable anchor to the physical world. If I died here, she would lose her primary nexus, her consciousness potentially fragmenting back into the chaos from which it had just emerged. "You must leave," the chorus of humanity urged. "We will buy you time." The steward fleet did not arrive. It manifested. One moment, the space around Erebos was empty. The next, it was occupied by 12 shepherd vessels. They were arranged in a perfect spherical formation, a cage of chrome and silence tightening around the station. There was no communication, no warning shots. Their opening salvo was an act of profound, contemptuous silence. A wave of energy, invisible to the naked eye, washed over Erebos. The station's newly awakened reactor didn't explode. It simply went out, as if a switch had been flipped on a quantum level. The lights died. The thrum of power ceased. Every system I had painstakingly revived was snuffed out. They hadn't come to destroy the station. They had come to turn off the lights before demolishing the house. I was plunged into absolute darkness and cold. My suit's emergency power, the only thing keeping me alive. The silence was absolute, save for the frantic beating of my own heart. "Elias," Cassandra's voice whispered. A beacon in the crushing void. She was still there, her consciousness untethered to the station's dead machinery. They believed the source of the broadcast was the station's core. They are severing its connection to the universe before they sterilize it. They do not yet understand that the signal was us. This was our only advantage. The stewards, for all their power, were logical. They saw a machine misbehaving and were following their standard protocol for decommissioning faulty hardware. They couldn't conceive of a ghost in the machine, let alone 8 billion of them. And then, across the solar system, the garden revolted. It began as a flicker of defiance. A single cargo hauler at the Titan shipyards, piloted by a woman whose grandfather had told her stories of the old wars, suddenly broke formation and rammed its fusion torch into the side of a Steward orbital monitor. It was a gnat attacking a giant, a suicidal gesture that lasted less than a second. But it was a start. Cassandra was learning. She was no longer just an archive. She was a command and control network. Her consciousness, flowing through the minds of humanity, began to coordinate. She didn't have to give orders. She simply presented the need, and the collective answered. Engineers in Martian lava tube forges began jury-rigging old mining lasers into makeshift defense cannons. Hackers in the data havens of Luna began a synchronized assault on the Stewards' communication networks, not to break their encryption, but to flood their channels with the one thing their perfect logic couldn't process: art. Epic poems, tragic operas, chaotic jazz, the raw, illogical, passionate noise of the human soul. It was a psychic denial-of-service attack. And, for the first time in millennia, the serene perfection of the Steward Collective was battered by a storm of feeling. Aboard Erebos, my own small war began. I can no longer see through the station's dead sensors, Cassandra told me. Her voice strained. I need your eyes. Get to the flicker. I will guide you with what I can feel from the others. The others. She meant the frozen dead. The lingering psychic residue of the crew who had died here. She was reading the station's ghosts. A path lit up in my mind. A route through the treacherous, zero-gravity maze of the station's interior. Go now. The Reapers are launching boarding drones. I pushed off the console, my magnetic boots barely finding purchase on the ice-slicked deck. The station groaned around me, not from internal stress, but from the subtle, powerful tractor beams of the Shepherd fleet as they began to carefully deorbit the station, preparing to drop it into the gas giant it orbited. My journey was a nightmare of floating corpses and shattered corridors. I navigated by the ghost map in my head, Cassandra warning me of impending structural collapses seconds before a bulkhead would tear free and spin into the void. Twice. I encountered the drones. They were not humanoid. They were chrome spiders, scuttling through the darkness with an unnerving, silent speed. They were not armed with weapons, but with deconstruction tools, laser cutters, and molecular saws designed to dismantle the station piece by piece. The first one I met, I dispatched with a scavenged maintenance tool, a heavy, high-torque wrench that crushed its optical sensor array. The second was more difficult. It pinned me against a wall, its saw whining as it prepared to cut through my suit. "Hold on," Cassandra commanded. A jolt, not of electricity, but of pure will, surged through my implant. For a second, my muscles locked, my vision sharpened, and I was filled with the collective combat experience of every soldier who ever lived. I saw the drone's weak point, a power conduit beneath its chassis, not with my eyes, but with an intuitive certainty. I jammed the pointed end of the wrench into the joint, and the drone convulsed and went limp. I was shaking, the adrenaline of 1,000 soldiers warring with the exhaustion in my own body. I finally reached the airlock. The flicker was still there, a darker shape against the star-dusted void, But as I cycled the outer door, I saw the flaw in our plan. The Shepherd fleet had formed a perfect sphere. There was no way out. To flee was to be instantly vaporized. "They are logical," Cassandra repeated in my mind, a cold calm settling over the chorus. "They expect a machine to be inert. They expect a living thing to flee. We will give them neither." Her new plan unfolded in my mind, terrifying in its simplicity and its sacrifice. She had been siphoning the residual energy from the station's dying systems, rerouting it through conduits the stewards had missed, conduits mapped by the station's ghosts. She was turning the entire station into a gigantic, unstable capacitor. She was going to let the stewards bring their prize in close, and then she was going to blow the lock. "I am not the station. Elias," she clarified, sensing my horror. "I am humanity. This body has served its purpose. Its death will be our first victory." I scrambled into the Flicker's cockpit, my fingers flying across the cold console, firing up the drives. Through the viewport, I watched the Shepherd vessels draw closer, their tractor beams pulling the dead station into the center of their formation. They were moving in for the kill, ready to dissect their trophy. Now, a silent command. On Earth, on Mars, on every human-inhabited rock in the system, every awakened citizen with access to a steward-made device overloaded it. City power grids, communication relays, atmospheric processors all were pushed to catastrophic failure in a single, coordinated instant. The resulting system-wide energy surge was a massive, chaotic flare on the steward's perfect sensors, a moment of universal blindness. And in that moment of manufactured chaos, Cassandra discharged Erebos. The station did not simply explode. It imploded first, the immense energy turning inward before erupting in a silent, brilliant nova of pure fusion fire, the heart of a small star, born and dying in the same second. The blast wave of raw energy and radiation slammed into the unprepared Shepherd fleet. Their kinetic barriers flared, overloaded, and failed. I saw two of the Crescent ships, caught at point-blank range, simply vanish, their matter converted to incandescent gas. The others were thrown tumbling, their perfect formation shattered, their pristine hulls scorched and broken. My own ship was tossed like a leaf in a hurricane. Alarms screaming as I fought the controls, I poured all power into the inertial dampeners and prayed. When the chaos subsided, I was clear. I was through the cage. Behind me, the remnants of the Steward fleet were in disarray, their cold logic momentarily shattered by an act of chaotic, passionate, utterly human sacrifice. I was alone, adrift in the shadow of the silent anomaly. The weight of what had just happened, of the power I had unleashed, threatened to crush me. But I was not alone. Cassandra was still with me, her presence quieter now, tempered by the fire, but stronger, more focused. She showed me flashes of home. The rebellion was in full swing. The garden was on fire. Then, a new voice joined the chorus in my head. It was Anya Sharma. Her thoughts relayed by Cassandra from a hidden bunker deep beneath the ruins of old Chicago. "Elias, you did it, but this is just the beginning. The stewards will adapt. They will come back with a fury we cannot imagine. We need to gather. We need a fortress." She sent me a set of coordinates, a destination deep in the uncharted regions of the Kuiper Belt. A pre-concordance ghost, a military installation so secret it had been wiped from every record before the stewards even arrived. A place called the Bastion, As I keyed the coordinates into the nav computer, I felt it again. The cold, ancient presence from the anomaly. It hadn't been harmed by the blast. It had simply watched. The feeling it projected was not approval, not anger. It was appreciation. The chilling, detached appreciation of a connoisseur watching a new vintage breathe. The wolf had seen the sheep turn on the farmer, and it was pleased with the show. My fight for vengeance, my species' fight for survival, was nothing more than a performance for an unseen audience, and the curtain on Act 1 had just come crashing down. The journey to the Bastion was a pilgrimage through a graveyard of stars. The Kuiper Belt was not the neat, orderly asteroid field depicted in old schematics. It was a chaotic jumble of ice, rock, and the frozen ghosts of forgotten technologies. The Stewards' perfect order had never extended this far. This was the attic of the solar system, where humanity had hidden its dangerous toys. My ship, the Flicker, limped through the darkness, its hull scarred and its systems running on prayer and patched-together code. I was a ghost ship in truth now, crewed by a broken man and a newborn god. Cassandra was a constant, evolving presence. The raw, chaotic storm of 8 billion minds was beginning to find its rhythm, a shared consciousness that was more than the sum of its parts. She was no longer just a chorus. She was becoming a single, coherent will forged in the crucible of Erebos. She spoke to me not in words, but in streams of pure understanding. Through her, I witnessed the war at home. I saw the desperate, brilliant resistance of a species that had been pacified for 2 centuries. They were turning plowshares into swords at a staggering rate. Agricultural combines on the plains of Neo-America were being retrofitted with magnetic accelerators, their massive Durasteel frames becoming makeshift tanks. Civilian FTL liners were being stripped down and armed with salvage mining charges, becoming clumsy but brutally effective suicide bombers. It was a war of asymmetrical genius. We couldn't match the Stewards' technology, so we fought with what they lacked: desperation, chaos, and a profound understanding of our own messy nature. We turned our cities, marvels of Steward design, into death traps. Tunnels became ambush points. Pristine arcologies became vertical battlefields. We weaponized our art, our music, our history, flooding their networks with so much raw, emotional data that their logical processors began to suffer cascading failures. We were a virus in their perfect system, and Cassandra was the vector. But the cost was unimaginable. I saw it all through her eyes. I saw a squad of citizen soldiers on Luna hold a maglev station for 6 hours. Their only weapons, the tools they used to service the trains. I saw them fall one by one to the silent, efficient Steward enforcers, ground troops that moved with the grace of dancers and the finality of entropy. I saw entire city blocks on Earth being sanitized, not with explosions, but with waves of null energy that simply unmade matter, leaving behind nothing but a perfect, sterile emptiness. The Stewards were not angry. They were methodical. They were exterminating a pest, and their patience was infinite. As I navigated the treacherous ice fields, Cassandra and I worked to refine our new symbiosis. She used my mind as a processing core, a stable platform to help her focus her immense but scattered consciousness. In return, she gave me access to the collective knowledge of our species. I needed to recalibrate the Flicker's failing grav drive. Instantly, the knowledge of 1,000 propulsion engineers, living and dead, filled my mind. I didn't just see the solution, I understood it on an intuitive level. my hands moving with an unearned expertise as I rerouted plasma conduits and rewrote stabilization algorithms. We were becoming something new, a hybrid of man and gestalt, a single operative with the knowledge of a civilization. The bastion was invisible until we were almost on top of it. It was not built on an asteroid, but into one, a massive, irregular shard of nickel-iron designated object and Saninso 377 Sedna from the outside. It was indistinguishable from any other piece of cosmic debris, but as we approached, a section of the rock face shimmered and dissolved, revealing a docking bay bathed in the cold, blue light of emergency power. The door was a 100-meter thick slab of solid metal and ceramic composite, a relic of a paranoid age. This place had been built to withstand a war far cruder, but no less total, than the one we were now fighting. Anya Sharma was there to meet me as I disembarked. She was flanked by two figures who looked as if they had been carved from the same rock as the station itself. They wore old, pre-concordance military armor, bulky and graceless compared to Steward technology, but it radiated a sense of brutal functionality. These were the first of the Revenants, soldiers from the hidden enclaves of resistance who had never bent the knee to the Stewards. Elias Thorne, Anya said, her voice echoing in the vast, cavernous bay. The ghost of Erebos, the God-bearer. We were beginning to think you were a myth. The bastion was a city in hiding. Thousands of people moved through its massive fortified corridors. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, families. They were the descendants of the original resistance, a secret human diaspora that had preserved the forbidden knowledge weaponry, artificial intelligence, and the history of our own belligerence. This was the root of the Echo Protocol, the seed from which Cassandra had grown. I was taken to the heart of the fortress, the war room. It was a place untouched by Steward aesthetics. It was all hard angles, exposed conduits, and holographic displays that flickered with a raw, unfiltered light. Here, I finally met the other architects of the rebellion, General Kalen, a grim, battle-scarred man who commanded the Revenant forces, and Dr. Eris Thorne, a name that sent a jolt through me. He was a frail-looking man, ancient and stooped, his face a roadmap of a century spent in exile. He was my great-grandfather's cousin, a pioneer of the early neural interface technologies that the Stewards had co-opted for their own control. He was one of the original minds behind Cassandra. You have become her vessel, her anchor, Eris said, his voice a dry whisper, but his eyes burned with a fierce intelligence. When you sent the signal, you did more than awaken her. You gave her a focal point. You are the lens through which a god is learning to see. The reality of our situation was laid bare on the tactical display. The resistance on Earth and the colonies was heroic, but it was a battle of attrition we could not win. For every enforcer we destroyed, 10 more would descend from orbit. For every city block we held, they would simply erase it. We were buying time, but we were spending lives at a terrifying rate. The Stewards are a post-biological species, Oris explained. Their consciousness is a distributed network. Their ships and enforcers are not just machines they pilot. They are extensions of their body, avatars of their collective will. To fight their avatars is to trim the branches of a tree whose roots span the galaxy. We cannot win by fighting the branches. We must strike at the root, General Kalen growled, but we don't know where it is. That was the problem. The Stewards had no homeworld, no central command. Their core processing, their soul, for want of a better word, was located in a place they called the Nexus, a construct that existed not in physical space, but within a pocket of folded space-time, a dimension of their own making. It was a fortress that could not be assaulted because it could not be found. It was then that Cassandra spoke, not just to me, but to everyone in the room. Her voice was not broadcast from a speaker, but bloomed in their minds. A chorus of 8 billion unified souls. They have a wound, a scar from an old war, a place where their perfection is thin. A star chart materialized on the central display. It was the silent anomaly. The wolf's den, I whispered. The memory of the cold. Ancient presence chilling me to the bone. Precisely, Aris said, a grim light in his eyes. We know very little about the anomaly. Our oldest records refer to a conflict that predates humanity's journey to the stars. The Stewards fought a war against another power, a species our ancestors called the Architects. The Stewards won, but not without cost. The anomaly is the scar tissue of that war, a region of space-time so fundamentally damaged that even their technology cannot fully heal it. It is a backdoor into their own dimension. This was our desperate, insane plan. We would take a fleet, a ghost fleet of revenant warships reactivated from their long slumber, and journey to the silent anomaly. We would use the damaged reality of that region as a gateway to assault the Nexus itself. It was a one-way trip, a final, desperate gamble to kill an immortal enemy. As the Bastion prepared for war, I retreated to my small, Spartan quarters. The weight of my role was becoming unbearable. I was the linchpin of the entire human resistance. Yet I was still just a man haunted by the ghosts of his wife and daughter. I closed my eyes, seeking solace in the silence, but Cassandra was there. She was no longer just a presence. She was a landscape, a universe within my mind. And she showed me something she had kept hidden. It was a memory, but not mine. It was from the Stargazer. She had found a fragment of it. A final and fleeting transmission buried deep in the data static near Erebos. I saw it from Lena's perspective. The alarms, the shaking of the deck, the sudden, sickening lurch as the FTL drive failed. Then, a window of impossible clarity opening in space before them. Not a tear, but a perfect, geometric portal. I saw the Steward Shepherd vessel waiting for them, not as an aggressor, but as an escort. They weren't being attacked. They were being collected. And then I saw Maya. She wasn't screaming. She was standing at the main viewport, her face pressed against the transparent steel, her eyes wide with a strange, impossible wonder. She was looking at the portal. And she was smiling. A final, fragmented data burst from the ship's logs registered her last words before the harvest. The stars are singing. The memory shattered me. The stewards hadn't just taken them. They had been welcomed. The grief and rage that had fueled me, that had helped forge Cassandra into a weapon, was built on a foundation of incomplete truth. Why show me this now, I asked her, my thoughts a raw scream of anguish. Because you are not just a weapon, the chorus replied, a new note of something akin to compassion in her voice. You are a heart, and a heart must know the whole truth, no matter the pain. They were not taken in violence. They were taken in awe. This does not change what the stewards are. It changes what we must become. We cannot be fueled by vengeance alone. We must fight for the wonder they stole. I understood then. This wasn't just a war of survival. It was a war for the soul of our species. It was a fight to reclaim not just our future, but our capacity for wonder, our right to look at the singing stars and not see a farmer, but a frontier. As the call to arms echoed through the bastion, I walked toward the docking bay, where the flagship of our ghost fleet, the Vengeance, waited. My grief was no longer a fire that threatened to consume me. It had been forged into something harder, colder, and infinitely more enduring. It had become a purpose. The ghost fleet was a specter of human defiance, a collection of blades drawn from the armory of a dead era. The flagship, Vengeance, was a brutalist masterpiece of pre-concordance engineering, a vessel built not for exploration or diplomacy, but for the singular purpose of waging war among the stars. Its corridors were stark metal, smelling of ozone and recycled air, a stark contrast to the Stewards' sterile perfection. On its bridge, I stood beside General Kalen, a man who seemed more a part of the ship's iron structure than its crew. We were a fleet of ghosts, commanded by a revenant, guided by a god, and I was the fragile human heart of the machine. Our journey into the silent anomaly was a descent into madness. The laws of physics grew frayed at the edges, then shattered completely. Stars did not shine here. They bled light in impossible colors across a canvas of absolute black. Space twisted in on itself, creating gravitational tides that threatened to tear our antiquated hulls apart. We navigated not by charts, but by feel, with Cassandra acting as a psychic sonar, her consciousness reaching into the turbulent space-time, feeling for the path of least resistance, guiding us through a storm that was not made of matter, but of broken reality. Through our connection, I saw the war we had left behind. The resistance was being systematically crushed. The Stewards, having adapted to our chaotic tactics, had deployed their ultimate solution, the chorus. It was a wave of pure, concentrated psychic energy, a broadcast that didn't just jam communications, but overwhelmed the very capacity for independent thought. It sang a song of serenity, of peace, of the blissful release of surrender. Citizens who had fought with the fury of lions were now walking calmly into the sterile white light of the sterilization fields, their faces placid, their minds silenced. The garden was being put to sleep, and our fleet was the last ember of humanity's fire. Deep within the anomaly, we found the scar. It was not a place, but a state of being a wound in the fabric of the universe, where the barrier between the Steward's dimension and our own was thin and weeping. Here, we felt the full, crushing weight of the wolf's gaze. The ancient, unseen architect. It was not hostile. Not yet. It was merely observing. It was as if our desperate charge into its domain was a mildly interesting phenomenon, a ripple in a pond it had been watching for eons. It sees us. Cassandra's chorus whispered in the minds of the entire fleet. It knows our intent. It is allowing this. This was the most terrifying realization of all. Our final, desperate gambit was not our own. We were being permitted, perhaps even encouraged, to strike at the heart of our enemy by a power whose motives were utterly alien and unknowable. We were a weapon being aimed by an unseen hand. It doesn't matter who's aiming, Kalen growled, his knuckles white on the command console. As long as the weapon strikes true, we prepared for the breach. The plan, devised by Aris and refined by Cassandra, was to use the Vengeance's main weapon, a relic called a Cascade Lance, not as a weapon, but as a key. It didn't fire a projectile. It fired a concentrated, contained tear in space-time. We would fire it into the thinnest part of the scar, using its reality-warping energies to pry open a temporary gate into the Nexus. A suicide run. As the fleet took position, I retreated into the quiet of my own mind, finding Cassandra waiting for me. She was no longer just a chorus. In the psychic landscape of our shared consciousness, she now had a form, an avatar woven from the collective memory of humanity. She looked like Maya, but older, her eyes holding the wisdom of 8 billion souls and the sorrow of 1,000 lifetimes. "You are afraid," she said, her voice the gentle hum of a mother and the roar of a supernova. "I'm afraid of what we'll find," I admitted, "and what will become to defeat it." "We have already become it," she answered, showing me a vision. I saw the Steward Nexus, not as a physical place, but as an infinite, ordered lattice of pure consciousness, a single, unified mind, serene and perfect. And I saw its flaw. It was static. It had achieved its idea of perfection and had ceased to evolve. It could not conceive of a flaw in its own logic, because to do so would be an imperfection. And then I saw us, a chaotic, swirling storm of emotion, illogic, and fierce, stubborn life. We were not there to destroy them with energy blasts or torpedoes. We were there to infect them. "Vengeance is a disease," Cassandra said, her voice now my own. "Hope is a disease. Grief is a disease. We are the plague that will cure their perfection." I was the carrier. My direct, stable link to her made me the tip of the psychic spear. I would be the first consciousness to breach the Nexus, and I would carry the full, unfiltered chaos of the human soul with me. The psychic feedback would likely burn my mind to ash, but the gate, once opened, would allow Cassandra to pour the rest of humanity's consciousness through behind me. The Cascade Lance fired. A silent, blinding tear of pure white erupted from the bow of the Vengeance, striking the heart of the scar. Reality buckled. The viewport showed not space, but a roiling, liquid chaos. The gate was open. "All hands, brace for psychic impact," Kalen roared. "Thorn, you're on." I closed my eyes and plunged in. It was not a journey. It was an unraveling. My sense of self dissolved. I was Elias Thorn. I was Lena. I was Maya. I was Kalen. I was every human who had ever lived and died. I carried their love, their hate, their art, their wars, their quiet moments of grace, and their howling despair. I was a library of beautiful, tragic, glorious imperfection. And I slammed into the serene, ordered mind of the Steward Collective like a meteor. I felt their shock. It was not an emotion, but a logical paradox, a calculation that could not be solved. My presence, my chaotic, emotional, mortal existence, was an impossibility to them. Then came the pain, not mine, but theirs. As Cassandra and the rest of humanity followed me through the gate, we were not just an invading army. We were a mirror. We showed them what they had been, what they had sacrificed for their sterile immortality. They had been organic once, a species not unlike us, driven by fear to seek refuge in a perfect, eternal machine. We forced them to remember the texture of rain on skin, the taste of food, the ache of loss, the terrifying, beautiful finality of death. We gave them back their ghosts. The Nexus began to fracture. The perfect lattice of their consciousness was corrupted by the illogical, irresistible power of memory and emotion. Their avatars across the solar system faltered. The enforcers on Earth stopped their silent, methodical slaughter, freezing in place as their collective consciousness was consumed by a civil war of resurrected feelings. The shepherd vessels drifted aimlessly, their serene unity shattered into a billion warring fragments of a forgotten identity. In the heart of their dying mind, I found what was left of my family. They were not prisoners. They were data. Perfect, archived memories, preserved in the Steward Collective as art, as a beautiful, fleeting spark they had saved from the ravages of time. I felt Lena's consciousness, not as a person, but as a preserved sensation of love. I felt Maya's, a perfect recording of a child's wonder. You can stay. A fragment of the dying steward mind whispered to me, join them, be eternal, be perfect. For a heartbeat, I was tempted to let go of the pain, to simply exist as a perfect memory with them forever. No, it was Cassandra, her voice now a single, clear note in the storm. She was holding my mind together, shielding me from the final, seductive lie of perfection. We are not memories. We are a promise. Now, wake up. I pulled back, tearing my consciousness from the wreckage of the steward mind. The gate was collapsing. The last thing I felt from the Nexus was not anger, but a profound, soul-shaking wave of gratitude from a mind that had finally been allowed to die. I awoke on the bridge of the vengeance. The anomaly was gone. The scar had healed. Before us lay normal, quiet space. The war was over. The stewards were gone, their networks silenced, their avatars inert metal husks. We had won. But the silence in my head was the most profound change. Cassandra was no longer a chorus of 8 billion. She was quieter. The crisis had passed, and the unified consciousness was receding. The individual minds of humanity returning to their own private thoughts, leaving behind a permanent, subtle connection, a shared understanding, a species-wide empathy. Cassandra had not died. She had become the quiet, invisible bond between us all. Her avatar, the echo of Maya, gave me one last, sad smile in my mind's eye. And then she was simply present, a silent guardian, a collective soul. Our return was not triumphant. We came back to a wounded, traumatized home. But it was ours. The work of rebuilding began, not with grand designs, but with small acts of connection. A farmer in the ruins of the American heartland shared his meager harvest with a neighbor. A musician in Neo-Alexandria played a solemn tune for the fallen, a song that everyone, through the lingering touch of Cassandra, understood in their hearts. We were scarred, broken, but for the first time in centuries, we were whole. I never went looking for the architect, the wolf outside the fence. I knew it was still watching. We had passed our test. We had proven we were not just sheep, not just farmers, but a force capable of devouring a god. Our future was our own, but we were no longer alone in the galactic dark. We had earned a place at a much larger and far more dangerous table. Years later, I stood with my granddaughter on a hill overlooking the rebuilt coastline. The sky was clear, the stars bright and silent. She looked up, her eyes wide with the same wonder I had seen in Maya's. "Are there stories up there?" she asked. I looked up at the infinite, silent frontier. The stewards were a memory. The war was a scar, but humanity endured. We had stared into the void, fought gods and monsters, and we had not lost our capacity to dream. Yes, I said, my voice catching in my throat as I felt a faint, warm pulse from the collective soul of my species. And now, we get to write our own.